Hi, my name is Kevin Komo. I am a youth minister and master student of religious studies based in Nairobi, Kenya. And in this video, I want to take you through a research project I recently completed that was on church attendance of Christian youth in Nairobi. I undertook this research project in partial fulfillment of my study requirements, but I also chose to undertake this particular topic, this specific topic, because of the discrepancy I saw between urban population growth projections of Christianity in African urban cities over the next couple of decades and the realities on the ground of youth in Nairobi who are disappointed and disillusioned with church and how they voiced that on social media and how that whole voicing has been taken and portrayed in mass media as well. Allow me to explain my reasons in depth a bit more. So, statistics on Africa's youth and urban populations are quite positive in terms of growth. Median age is 20, Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent, and by 2050, Africa's population will have doubled from 1.35 to 2.5 billion people. All that means that Africa's burgeoning population will be subject to the events of urbanization on their education, health, worldview, and overall life experience. Furthermore, Christianity is projected to be on an upward trajectory in Africa, alongside Islam. So great is the growth of Christianity on the continent that by 2060, Africa is supposed to be the heartland of Christianity, having a share of 42% of the world's Christians. All this data, however, is based on population factors, birth and death rates, fertility variance, and so on and so forth. The question on the ground is whether or not those who are identified as Christians during birth, death, or a census are actually practicing Christians. Daystar undertook this question back in the 80s in Nairobi. They undertook the Nairobi Church Survey to try and understand the state of church attendance and nominalism at that time. And the results showed that Sunday church attendance was just 8% of Nairobi's population on a weekly basis and 20% on a monthly basis, despite 70% of the people in Nairobi at that time identifying as Christians. They asked the question again in a survey of youth in 1998, having sampled 1,000 youth, 94% of whom identified as Christians, and 92% of whom attended church services, with a majority of them attending at least once a week. The results of the second survey on youth were more positive than the Nairobi Church Survey a decade earlier. But since that time, the internet and social media has grown, and along with it, this notion of outrage and dissident voices from young people about the church in Nairobi have grown stronger and stronger. I have personally experienced that in my own social circles. I've seen hashtags and long posts that speak of youth's disappointments with the church and the Christian faith. But even with all that, the event that really cemented my interest in doing a research project like this happened during COVID-19 lockdown in Nairobi, Kenya. After 3 months of total lockdown in 2020, the government imposed a reopening regulation on churches that saw only 13 to 58-year-olds allowed to attend. Clergymen from two regions adjacent to Nairobi complained that this regulation was irrelevant, as not many in that age group go to church or are leaders in the church. The clergymen were not from the city of Nairobi itself, but many of the churches they represented had branches here, and their pronouncements spoke volumes about the state of youth church attendance. It was then that I decided to undertake this project. So I did. And I took the study with the following research questions in mind. To what extent do youth in Nairobi who are affiliated with Christianity attend church, given that the youth population in Nairobi is exponentially growing? To what extent have these youth had their attendance of church affected by mass media, social media, and science and technology? And in 30 years' time, what do youth in Nairobi who are affiliated with Christianity expect attendance of church to be by percentage? The methodology was very simple. The scope was limited to my own social networks because of time and resources. However, I was able to target both the youth I have ministered to and a network of youth pastors and ministers in the city, and therefore the answer should be able to shed some light on the research questions. I employed a two-step methodology. The first step was to administer an online survey. The online survey was a questionnaire which was developed with Google Forms, and the idea was just to gather a number of people and get a general idea of what are the general church attendance practices and opinions. The survey was marketed for 10 days on my social networks, that's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and also amongst my WhatsApp connections. About 2,500 people saw the survey, and 210 of them responded, with 205 of the responses being admissible for analysis. The second step of the methodology was to take a sample of 10 people from the respondents and interview them, just to shed more light on how the respondents answered questions. 10 people were chosen, but in the end only 7 were able to meet the timings for the interview and the research itself. So what did we find? Well, first and foremost, who answered the questionnaire? Of the 205 responses that were analyzed, 52.2% were female and 47.8% male. The average age of the respondents was approximately 27, the median age was 28, and the modal age was 27 as well. All the respondents identified or had previously identified as Christian, and that means they fell in our category, our target category of youth affiliated with Christianity. Most of the respondents had attended church in Nairobi, with only 2 of them saying they had not. Over 80% of the respondents attended church in Nairobi weekly or more frequently than weekly. That's an overwhelming percentage. And all the respondents indicated that they had attended over 130 churches in Nairobi collectively. The full list of that is available in a document which is linked in the description of this video below. And that document is actually the survey report for this research paper. 34% of the respondents indicated that they were pastors or leaders in their church, while 66 indicated they were not. So a third of them were leaders. What were the results? According to the research questions, research question 1, 77.1% of the respondents thought that youth attendance in churches in Nairobi was decreasing. The other 22.9% thought it was increasing. Here are the reasons, as you can see on your screen, but I'll only highlight the top 3. Good relevant programming, outreach, and engagement was a top reason for those who thought it was increasing. By programming here, we're talking about the strategies for evangelism, discipleship, leadership, and outreach and engagement to young people. The second was desire for God or revival amongst youth. And the third was people's own experiences in going to church more. Maybe they were in a new church that was growing and the youth attendance was growing, and that's where they answered the question from. However, for those who thought it was decreasing, the top 3 issues were 1, cultural shifts and relevance of what the church was teaching, and looking at all the cultural trends with regards to worldview, and even simple things like people working on Sundays, and so on and so forth. And the church, how the church was teaching and what the church was expecting of people, there seemed to be a gap there. The second largest was poor programming, which was interesting because this is the first reason that those who are increasing, or those who said it was increasing, gave. It seems as if, based on your experience of programming in your church, this was a major factor in whether youth were attending or not. And the third reason was COVID-19. Research question 2, the majority of the respondents thought that mass media, social media, and science and technology negatively affected youth church attendance. Specifically, mass media, 57.1%, social media, 61.4%, science and technology, 61.4%. Research question 3, 55.1% of the respondents thought that church attendance in Nairobi in 2050 will have decreased by percentage of the population. 30.7% sure, and 14.1% thought it would increase. Of those who said it would decrease, the top 3 reasons were the virtual church. They felt that online churches would definitely increase in attendance, which would lead to a decrease in physical church attendance. The second reason was shifting beliefs and practices of religions and worldviews on the African continent. So all the ideas around Christianity being anti-African and therefore what people were exploring as a result would contribute. And the third top reason was current problems in church have to be addressed, especially with regards to the programming for young people. Top 3 reasons for those who said they were not sure. The most were just not sure. The second reason was, again, contingent on things changing in church, and they did not know whether things would change or not. The third said statistical uncertainty, not enough data to know whether things will be different or not by that time. For those who said more, top 3 reasons were there's a continuing hunger, genuineness, and desire, a need for God, and a spread of the gospel that will lead to people coming. The second reason was virtual church, again, online church. There are those who felt that online churches would have a wider reach and pull in more people to start attending church. And number 3 was that just a personal hope that people will attend church, more people will attend church. The interviews were a bit more fluid in terms of discussion. The emerging themes are that the church is not relevant to the culture of the world that the youth experience. 4 interviewees said that. 4 also said bad experiences in church, whether judgment or an unwelcoming atmosphere, hypocrisy, heavy expectations with regards to behavior or finances, or just not feeling that the church is a safe place. That has led to a decrease. There was an interesting comment about expectations and vision, and 2 of the interviewees felt that the world seems to give young people a more compelling vision for their lives than the church does. There seems to be more options and a clarity in the route to getting there in the world than there is from the church. I found that interesting. All interviewees had a chance, prompted by me, to speak on what they thought online church would do to church attendance. And for all of them, they felt that online church attendance will definitely grow in the next 30 years. But they were not in agreement as to whether this meant there would be an increase or decrease in church attendance or Christianity as a whole. They also had a chance, prompted by me, to speak about mass media, social media, and science and technology and its effect on church attendance. And they all did feel that these things have a big say in church attendance, that these are the places where the hearts of the youth are, especially social media. But they felt there was this feeling that it was more or less amoral and it could be used for good or bad. And depending on how it's used, it could either help or not help. So concluding our findings and answering our questions. Research question 1. The answers we got from the interviewees and the respondents tell us that youth attendance of church in Nairobi is decreasing, due mainly to inadequate programming, outreach and engagement of youth, as well as a lack of focus on reaching and building relationships with youth, amongst a time where culture shifts and trends are anti-Christian. Research question 2. Mass media, social media and science and technology have negatively affected youth attendance of church in Nairobi. However, these are more amplifiers of the issues mentioned rather than causes in and of themselves. And research question 3. Barring divine intervention, church attendance in 30 years' time in Nairobi will be less in percentage of the population than it is now. Virtual church attendance will increase. However, the key to turning the tide in decrease is addressing changes in churches with regard to youth prioritization, engagement, and discipleship. There were no big surprises for me in how the interviewees or respondents answered the question, except the fact that COVID was not as big a factor as I thought it would be. It is mentioned in virtually every answer, but its biggest contribution is to low church attendance today. And even then, it was the 3rd largest reason. There were other reasons that the respondents felt were more important. I'd like to scrunch down all my recommendations into one observation for the sake of the video, and that is obstacles versus opportunities. Everything I read in the literature about Africa's young people, the population growth, and Christianity amongst them seems to scream opportunity. And the answers I got in the survey from the respondents and the interviews seemed to lean more towards obstacles. Both are important, and I'd like to address both. To youth ministers like myself, I'd like to say embrace the obstacles. Listen to what the young people are saying. Sit down with the Lord and figure out how to address it. In the written document, the written report of this research paper, there are a couple of questions I've placed in the recommendation section you can use, but sit down and figure it out. Why? Because it's the faith of a generation at stake. And to the youth, who basically in this case seem like recipients, I would say embrace the opportunity. Yes, you have valid reasons to be upset and disappointed by church or what has happened in church or how it's done or how it's run. They are valid reasons. But just because they are valid reasons doesn't mean it's worth throwing out. If anything, it's going to be yours in a short time to frame it as you wish. Don't waste that opportunity. Every major revival, reformation, and revolution began with a person or a group of people who were angry about the status quo, and they were very clear on what was wrong and what needed to change. The fact that you're angry or upset just means that you're already on the path towards changing it. So change it. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. My name is Kevin Komo, and this has been my research project. Thank you for listening.